It's time for 41 is the Mic, a weekly Chiefs podcast with Nick Jacobs of KSHB 41 and Matt Derrick of Chiefs Digest. 41 is the Mic starts now.
Well, it wasn't the outcome that Chiefs fans wanted, but the 2024 season had come to an end with Super Bowl 59. I am Matt Derrick alongside Nick Jacobs, off-season enthusiast from KSHB 41. Nick, I think I asked the question, and we'll get into it almost, I guess, immediately. What the heck happened last night?
All the Chiefs' sins, if you want to call it, on offense, all the problems with part of how the roster was built, part of the scheme, part of the predictability of the scheme, everything combined came home to roost. Vic Fangio watched every single snap. Vic Fangio looked at every single tendency the Chiefs did. Vic Fangio predicted what the Chiefs were going to do out of it, both in play calling and in how Patrick would respond. And they went full throttle at it, especially for the first 4 to 5 drives. They knew what they were going to do. They knew what they were going to try. They knew what they might lean on. They knew their tendencies, and they exploited every single one of them. And the Chiefs really didn't have adjustments until the Eagles started backing off and were up by enough. And at that point, it was already too little too late. And they were well behind. Not only they were well behind in the scoreboard, but they were also well behind in terms of the intensity the Eagles brought and their answers to that intensity. So Vic Fangio had their number. Vic Fangio had their number in a way that he hadn't before, and him and that Eagles defense just played with a certain intensity, and the way that their back seven played in unison with how the scheme was, they played as a collective unit, and the Chiefs were not able to overcome that within a quick enough time. And then the one final window that they had to really kind of keep it in the ball game early in the third quarter there, they didn't. And that was honestly the end of the game. People just didn't realize it yet until they had the dagger throw that put them up 34.
Yeah, that was. I mean, at 27, it was not much of a chance of a comeback. I mean, obviously 28-3, Patriots were able to do that in basically the last. They had like a 6-minute drive to score, but they did, scored all their points in the last, I think, 17-18 minutes of that game, that Super Bowl game against Atlanta. Once the Chiefs in that third quarter drive right before the Eagles struck to go up 34-0, seemed to be their last chance. That was the drive that they had to score on. They had to get a touchdown, didn't, and then the Eagles came right back, go up on top 4-0, and that was the end of it. I want to go back to the very beginning of the game, because at least as far as the offense goes, because first throw, 11 yards, Juju Smith-Schuster over the middle, short. I was like, okay, Chiefs have figured this out. They know exactly the game plan. They know exactly where the weakness of the Eagles defense is. And last time, they attacked with the short passing game. It worked. They're going to do it again. They had a great, quick short pass to Xavier Worthy. Well, it was only 1 yard, but, hey, sometimes he's going to be able to make that miss. Had the drop by Kelce, I believe that was a drop, and then Hollywood Brown misconnection. I mean, it was all short passes. That looked good. But then it just seemed like at that moment, Mahomes got antsy to me. It looked like once again he was getting off schedule. He was looking downfield. He was gazing. He was looking for guys to make shots that weren't there and bypassing open receivers. And and sometimes it's the progressions. I get it. And as the game wore on, you couldn't blame him for not being able to get through his progression because the protection was breaking down. But it seemed like after that first drive, the second drive, and remember that Juju Smith-Schuster catch was their only first down of the first half. After that, it seemed like you said, the Chiefs' sins came to roost. All their worst habits suddenly became just obvious.
Yeah, so I mean, for that first series on the third down, the Eagles, where the Chiefs went off the field, the Eagles had they went to some man coverage there, and they blanketed all the wide receivers. Athletically, they were able enough to blanket all the wide receivers, and I think Mahomes was expecting certain windows in those zones to be able to kind of manipulate and try to throw into. But I mean, everybody was blanketed at that point. And what the Eagles were doing with their ends is they were going wide nines and they were just hitting spots upfield. And so they were getting to certain spots upfield with both tackles that they knew would make Patrick uncomfortable and not feel like he was allowed to run outside the pocket and create and be able to kind of buy time for his receivers to get open. So in part of it, the routes were developing so slow, and that's going to be something that the Chiefs are going to have to figure out in the wide receiver group collectively in the offseason. The routes weren't hitting quick enough, the combination of them. So I mean, the Chiefs were still running the trips formations. They were still running that, but the combination of them and the windows they're trying to create with them just weren't hitting as quickly as they needed to with the level of pass rush they were going against. And so, like, what I'm getting at is by probably the 6th, 7th, or 8th series there, then they finally started max protecting, only having 2 or 3 routes out there. But you're already down 34 at that point. So, like, those max protection things, I hate to say it, some of those probably had to be earlier in the game for them to kind of let Patrick get back to zero. And they abandoned the run game, which is another thing that used to help Patrick get back to zero throughout the year. And there wasn't, in my opinion, from a play calling perspective, there wasn't enough that could get Patrick back to zero and reset him as a quarterback to where he could get comfortable and confident again. The Eagles' mission, Vic Fangio's mission, was to speed Patrick up in those first 3 series. And he knew by having wide nines or having the angle rushes that he did with his 2 ends at the speed he was doing to get to these spots where Patrick normally likes to set at and be able to process and evaluate and get through, that he knew he could soup him up. And then what the Chiefs tried to do to counter with some of that is they tried to do rollouts. They tried to get around, they tried to roll out. They tried to do cut the field in half. And when they finally cut the field in half, that's what led to that pick six. That pass DeAndre wasn't going to get that pass. Like that pass was, one, it was offline, and 2, it just wasn't going to get there. But Cooper DeJean was there sitting on it, and Patrick just tried to throw it on the spot, and then Cooper jumped it and took it back for a pick 6, and like that put him up 17 at that point. But the way they knew what the Chiefs were going to try to do with how they were going to, okay, they're probably going to start trying to roll out here. They're going to run this route combination. And I've even looked at some of the quotes and everything, and there were some things they expected them to do, and the safeties coach worked with them on the week based on route combinations of what they'd been doing throughout the year. And he said that's how that Cooper DeJean play worked out the way it did, because they worked on it in practice during the week because they expected this route combination to happen at some point. And so, I mean, that for a safeties coach to be able to say that, they're only saying that if they've watched enough tape study to know what you're going to do and how you're going to respond based on certain situations.
Yeah, and there's so many different directions I want to still go in the offense, but you touched on one at the very end there with the run game. And the Chiefs did. I mean, Andy Reid mentioned after the game that, they got behind and they had to go all pass. But that wasn't the case in the first half. I mean, they ran one time with Kareem Hunt in the first quarter. Yep. Ran twice with Isaiah Pacheco in the third quarter, and that was it for the first half. 3 runs. There's no way that's not a balanced attack in any sport. I mean, if you're that obvious, the Eagles just absolutely knew exactly what they could do. I mean, there's no variety there. I was just really surprised that they completely abandoned the run that quickly and that dramatically, and especially getting away from Kareem Hunt.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that they're going to have to discuss and think about in the offseason. They're going to get a lot of time to think about in the offseason just why they abandon what they needed to kind of keep Patrick at 0 and try to help him reset and not feel like he had to carry everything and run around and scramble around and try to buy enough time for his receivers to be able to find voids either in the coverage or to be able to get open. And so Patrick had to lean on last night at times things that had worked in the offense in the past, but it's been seen so much now in the league that part of it, like I said, is a combination I said earlier, to where they don't necessarily have the speed at wide receiver and tight end that they used to, and even honestly at running back, that can hit those plays as quickly as they used to and be able to turn those into big yak situations and have a yak party. And like that's not happening as much anymore because they just don't have that same team speed at those skill positions. And the other part of it is like they knew if they put Joe Thuney back in Patrick's lap like they did on that one interception, that there was going to be, based on the down and distance, that interception that happened there near the goal line, and A.J. Brown ended up scoring off of it on a crossing route on a couple plays later. They knew the crossing routes were coming based on certain spots, and they were sitting on it specific ways in zone coverages, just waiting for that to happen and to be able to potentially jump on it. And they also had faith in their ends were going to not only contain Mahomes, but also and force him to step up in the pocket. But they knew that they were going to speed him up and that they only had to cover specific areas to be able to make him even more uncomfortable and kind of not feel like he didn't have an answer at times for where to place the football.
And when it comes to Mahomes, I mean, this was, let's face it, I mean, I that was the worst first half of football that I've ever seen Patrick Mahomes play. Probably the worst that I ever series of plays that he played. And I get it. I mean, the protection wasn't there. The play calling was maybe not helping him out. But even like that decision that resulted in the interception by Cooper DeJean, that's a throw you just can't make. I mean, even Mahomes with his confidence needs to know he can't make that throw. That is just absolutely throw it away. You can't turn the ball over in that situation. And that's one of the things that, since that Buffalo game, he'd done such a good job of making those decisions. I don't know. I mean, I may be projecting a little bit too much, Nick, but I felt like that from the very beginning, and especially starting with that second drive, that Patrick Mahomes was wanting to try to win MVP. He was three-peating. He was trying to not only to win the game, but bury the Eagles. And that's just not the mentality that you can go into a game with.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like he felt the game slipping away there at a certain point, and I think he felt like he needed to be the guy to make that play to help be the fire starter and everything. And in my opinion, part of that's just from a play calling perspective. They put him in that situation to where he has to have that, where he feels like he has to have that mentality. And then just another part of it was like some of the plays they were giving him, there just wasn't. Like if he wants to throw a home run ball like he was able to do a couple times in the second half to Xavier Worthy, then from a play calling perspective, they get a max protect for him. And I mean, there was one they tried to call where they motioned Worthy in, and Mahomes was wanting to toss it deep, and he ended up having to throw to Juju, and Kelsey's also there as well and has multiple defenders around him from what I saw on coach's film. So like they gave him a couple plays here and there to try it, but not really to truly be able to just uncork it. And I hate to say it, but get out some of that frustration and everything, because that's kind of what Patrick kind of leans back into sometimes whenever he feels like he needs to make a play. He wants to uncork it. And so part of helping him, I hate to say it, get rid of that frustration is max protect and give him a couple deep routes with Hollywood Brown and Worthy. And they finally did that when they were in a situation where it didn't really matter anymore. But there were some times earlier where like, hey, it's okay to max protect. Like, I mean, you don't have to do your 3 wide receiver combination routes that are taking a little too long to develop with the way the edge rushers are coming. And, also not running the ball as well. like that was going to cause. I mean, should Patrick have made that throw? I mean, no, it burned them, and it really kind of derailed where they were at and dropped them down 17-0. But at the same time, the bigger thing the coaching staff has to look at is, why did Patrick feel like he had to make that throw? And what did we do wrong as a coaching staff to feel like he was in that position and had to do that? That he felt like that was the choice that had to make to try to spark this game. And that's also another thing the front office is going to have to figure out as well.
Yeah, there was a story before the game from Saturday night that from the Kansas City Star, talking about how at the team meeting Saturday night that the Chiefs were showing a video that was all about pumping up and hyping up Patrick Mahomes. And that scared me the moment I saw that, Nick, because I'm like, this is the last guy in the world that you need to hype up even more. And I mean, if anything, I mean, I'm wanting to put him on Xanax before a game, because usually before Super Bowls he comes out so hyped up anyway. So I'm with you. I think there was a certain part of Mahomes that, you know, certainly felt like that the entire game was on him and it was all about him. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I just mean that's just how that the Chiefs hyped up the game to him and how it kind of unfolded. There's one thing on the offensive line that I do want to kind of wrap up before we move on to the other side of the football. And you talked about it, you know, but specifically, I mean, Vic Fangio did what Vic Fangio does. Did not blitz the entire game. And at one point,
I will say that is, I know that stats out there
from a certain point of view, you say.
I saw a blitz on one of those plays where they were down near the goal line before Mahomes threw that second interception. There's a blitz by Zach Bond. They just dropped the D end in the coverage. So it still looks the same because it's three rushers, but it was actually technically he's blitzing. So when I saw that, I was like, well, that's inaccurate. But I know where that stat comes from next gen.
What?
Do what?
Next gen stats letting me down? No good. That's no good.
So, and that's what I'm saying. That's not on Matt, because I know that started floating around out there. And I mean, I retweeted and everything, but when I was watching Coach Film, I was like, no, Bond blitzes right here. It's just that end drops back. So it still looks like three, but it's in a different spot than where it was before. Because that's when Patrick saw that and Patrick rolled out. And I can't remember what the result of the play was. It didn't end well. But I know they were down deep in their own goal line.
But, you know, you hit on it earlier too, which is that, you know, the Eagles were going wide nine. They were attacking really Joe Thuney and Jawan Taylor on the outside, which is their weakness. I mean, we know that. I mean, we've been talking about that for a couple of weeks, and, you know, we've seen teams increasingly over the last few weeks, especially against Joe Thuney, do that. But what really stood out to me, and it was just that how disciplined and physical that Eagles was, because not only, you know, did they just make sure that they didn't get out of their lanes, they made sure that Mahomes didn't really have any room to run up the middle and escape, but they also, you know, they out physical the Chiefs offensive line. I mean, and it's true at a lot of different positions, but this Eagles team, I mean, that's one of the reasons that's the biggest reason to me why they won this Super Bowl. They were the more physical, more aggressive team on Monday.
Yeah, no, the Eagles defensive line, they showed up in a big way. They were motivated. They were able to use their four guys to really create havoc the entire time, and they knew they could create it in 3 seconds. And they knew the Chiefs receivers and the route combinations were not going to get open quick enough to be able to stop them from getting home. And they were 100% right. Their coaches on the Eagles defensive side of the staff helped them believe that throughout the week, helped build that confidence. And when the game plan series by series was going the way that clearly that coaching staff thought it would, the players you could see just have the Eagles defense just have the level of confidence that they did, and just the intensity that they played with in those first 5 to 6 drives. You could tell they'd been sold a certain thing about how things were going to go if they executed a certain way. And you could see collectively, drive by drive, just how pumped they kept getting. Reaction play after play, because it was going the way that they had been told for probably almost 2 weeks, and that it was everything that they had bought into was working and succeeding. So Yeah, I mean, for the Chiefs, it's unfortunate because this was a chance to create NFL history that could, that's just tough, very tough to to get into position to win 3 in a row. But to have all the stars align from an injury perspective or from an execution perspective or from a scheme perspective, be able to work out to put yourself in a position to get 3 Super Bowls in a row, to win those, there's so many things that have to align for that to even possibly happen. And all of it had happened for the Chiefs. And so to be in that moment and for it to not go the way that they had hoped and the way that they probably envisioned, I mean, that's a bummer in itself. And like the chances of being able to do that again and to have all the stars align again like that for them and any other NFL team, I'm not saying it's impossible, but there's a lot that has to go right for something like that to happen just to get to 1 Super Bowl, let alone get to a third one and try to win a third one consecutively.
Yeah, they came closer than anybody else has during the Super Bowl era. Moving over to the defense, Nick. I mean, and we're not going to be dwelling on all negatives. In fact, at the end of the podcast, we're going to be talking about some of the things to look forward to. But the defense was a mixed bag. I mean, it was not all terrible. Jalen Hurts, I did not think was very good in the first half. I thought the Chiefs, and obviously the Chiefs not only shut down Saquon Barkley in the first half, they shut down Saquon Barkley in the entire game. If you had told me that the Chiefs were going to hold Barkley to what was it, I might look back at it to make sure I've got the numbers right. You probably know them off the top of your head, Nick. 20 carries, 57 yards. If you had told me before the game that the Chiefs were going to hold Saquon Barkley to that, I would have said that this was a Chiefs 40-22 win, not an Eagles win.
The thing I would have asked is how many turnovers did both teams have? That would have been my question if you give me those hypothetical scenarios on that front, because the Eagles were able to score off the turnovers that the Chiefs had, like they have against every other opponent this year, and that helped play a difference in it. So yeah, I mean, look, the defense played well enough to be able to win the football game if the offense is holding up its part on the other side of the ball and giving them the proper amount of rest, and also scoring some points and be able to kind of keep pace and keep par with them and everything. But they unfortunately wore down there towards the end, and then when Chris Jones got hurt with the knee issue, like that really took the wind out of their sail, what was left in terms of pass rush, and the pass rush was going to be non-existent after that point whenever Chris isn't on that field there towards the end. So, I mean, that was kind of the end of what the defense was going to be able to do on that front. And, I mean, there was times where, Trent McDuffie's lined up against A.J. Brown, and it's just not going to go well for them. So, yeah, I mean, there was some mismatches, and even at one point, whenever there was a crossing route, Nick Bolton's having to chase A.J. Brown on the crossing route over the middle after the second interception, and then the Eagles were able to score off that. There was just times where the Eagles were able to create mismatches with their 3 wide receivers, with Dotson, Brown, and DeVonta Smith, and they were able to expose some of the issues in the secondary coverage-wise and speed-wise, and then they were able to kind of do what they wanted because just how tough it was for the Chiefs front 4 defensive line to be able to pass rush at the same level or intensity that caused discomfort in key situations that the Eagles were able to do to the Chiefs.
Yeah, future, and by the time you listen to this podcast, maybe current coach of the New Orleans Saints, Kellen Moore, called a heck of a game, Nick. I mean, it was a perfect game plan, perfectly executed. I was taken by the fact that, and maybe this was sour grapes, but, on the one hand, I mean, talking to the Chiefs after the game and the defensive players, to a T, they were talking about the fact that the Eagles the Eagles offense didn't do anything that they hadn't seen on tape, that they didn't surprise them in any way whatsoever. A little concerning that if, you have seen it all before, that, you're not more prepared for it. But the Eagles, like to your point, a really good job of creating mismatches and going after guys like Trent McDuffie and not just steering away, but really challenging the teeth of the Chiefs defense.
Yeah, I mean, I'm personally not concerned by that response by the players. I totally get that because, yeah, what the Eagles showed had been out there. It's just the Chiefs were so locked in on being able to shut down Saquon Barkley in the run that on some of those key situations, on some of those third downs or when the Eagles needed to convert, they were able to because they had created the mismatch, the one-on-one opportunity that they wanted, and they were able to take advantage of it and exploit it. So they just they essentially made the plays in some of the key moments, and they weren't able to get there in quick enough time to be able to rattle Jalen Hurts to force him into a bad throw or force him into a poor decision. Like Hurts wasn't really running around for his life like Mahomes was for 5 to 6 series, So it was the difference in talent at receiver. It was the difference in talent of being able to pick on certain things, and the Eagles were able to do that against the Chiefs defense, and the Chiefs offense was not able to against that Eagles defense.
There was a real, to me, difference in the defensive lines of both these teams in the second half, because like I said, I thought that the Chiefs defense in general played well in the first half, and the defensive line in particular was doing a pretty good job of doing what they wanted to do, which frankly was to put this game into the hands of Jalen Hurts and put the ball into his hands and force him to make plays. And the turnovers obviously hurt the Chiefs in the first half. I didn't think that the deficit at the end of at halftime was really entirely anything to do with the defense. But whereas we talked about the physicality and the discipline of the Eagles defensive line in the first half, the entire game, frankly, the Chiefs defensive line really got out of character and kind of manhandled, I think, a little bit in the second half. They started freelancing a little bit too much more. The edges trying to going around the edge, but out of position, opened up a lot of running lanes for Jalen Hurts, and that just seemed to exacerbate the situation, especially in that third quarter.
Yeah, I mean, everybody wanted to make a play. Everybody wanted to make the difference to be able to help them get back into the game. And so increasingly when stuff like that happens, there's going to be times where it falls apart from a discipline perspective, and that's just kind of the reality of it. So, like in the offseason, I think the number one thing the Chiefs are really going to have to focus on defensively is adding a lot more to that defensive line from an athletic and strength perspective that's going to be able to be a difference maker a lot quicker in games, not just and throughout the season. Because when we've talked about it off air, like a D line's been a thing that I'm like, hey, no matter what happens, like they've got to get faster and they got to get stronger and more athletic at those spots. And so like that's gonna have to be a point of emphasis for what they do. And there's some stuff they're gonna have to do from a secondary perspective to infuse some more speed at the safety spot and just continue to add corners that they can, be able to kind of rotate in if there's injuries. So, I mean, there's stuff that they're going to have to do for Spagnuolo's scheme. There's a lot they're going to have to do for that offense. And, it doesn't get easier. There's a lot that they've got to fix overall in this team to try to put themselves back in a position like this next year so that they could have a collectively better game.
Yeah, it's crazy to think about the fact that we're just 5 weeks away from free agency, just a couple of months away from the draft. It's a lot to go on, and that's why you're the offseason enthusiast, Nick. I mean, we're gonna get into it.
Yeah, but we'll have a lot of time to talk about it. That's for sure.
We'll have a lot of time to talk about it. But before we get into the offseason in the future podcast, I do want to be positive, at least find some positives in this game and what the Chiefs can take away, what maybe they can learn from it. Obviously, it starts with me and Nick with Xavier Worthy. The end of his season, and particularly this game, backed off prevent defense or not, whatever it was, doesn't matter to me. That Xavier Worthy had some big plays throughout this entire game.
Yeah, that's the thing that the Chiefs are going to be able to build off of is they had him do some of those Tyreek Hill crossers over the field to where he literally ran half the field and he ran it in like 5 seconds and showcased that speed. And so that's something that the Chiefs can build off of, and that's something for Worthy to be able to build off of. And biggest game of his career, he really kind of was able to use his explosiveness to create some big plays. So, yeah, I mean, for the Chiefs, they can use that for him as that building block, and for Worthy, he can use that as a building block as he continues to improve as a wide receiver. And I'm going to be curious to kind of hear in the months ahead who he works with wide receiver coach wise in the offseason to kind of really take his game to another level, what he does to kind of really approach that, what type of chemistry he's able to build with Mahomes and some of the offseason throws when they get to that point, and all those things combined. But for Worthy, he took from where he was rookie camp weekend in May to where he's at now. He took massive steps, and he took advantage of all the opportunities to learn from the veteran wide receivers that he did, and to really be able to kind of take in every moment that he was a part of and really kind of grow as a player.
We're already into overreaction Monday, Nick. I mean, that's the tendency. And I've been online. I've seen all of the comments about how the Chiefs need to retool everything, fire people. I've even seen fire Andy Reid, which is completely and totally insane. But what are some of the other positives and some of the lessons that this team can take forward to learn from this game?
I mean, from a positive perspective, I guess they put themselves back in a position. Like, they're still going to have a roster that can make the playoffs next year if they stay healthy. But there's they're going to have to take this opportunity to evolve. They're going to have to they're going to have to be a little less predictable in what they're doing scheme-wise on offense. They're going to have to add more speed at the skill position on offense. And they're going to have to figure out from an offensive line perspective, and this is where I'm just going to flat out say it, they're going to have to decide if the offensive line coaches that they have can develop the players they're investing, or is there something that they're going to have to do differently? Are they going to have to bring in veterans that are pre-made and have the technique that they want and use those guys? Or, because you can only invest so much in offensive line financially and draft wise, and the Chiefs have done that. It's just the development for a lot of it is not reaching the point that you would hope with the investment you've made, in my personal opinion. And I could be wrong on that. But that's just from my vantage point that's something they got to figure out. At wide receiver, is it just they don't have the type of speed that they need that Mahomes likes at receiver? Is there something from finer points that from a coaching perspective that they've got to adjust? And from a running back perspective, where are the running backs at? Because they're going to have to add more explosiveness at running back. Like, I mean, they're going to have to do that through the draft. Like, there's no ifs, ands, or buts. Because that would have helped a lot throughout the year to have a speedy back that they could check down to in the flats, or they could run screens with, and that option wasn't there throughout the entire season because of the skill set they had. And that would have been one of those things at times that helps get Mahomes to zero and helps kind of get him a little, kind of get him back to a calm level at times. So I don't know if I necessarily said optimistic things to build off of, but I just said the reality of what they're going to have to look at from my vantage point. But I think they're going to, if I'm in the Chiefs' shoes, you're going to have to focus on what you're going to do at left tackle. You got to focus on where the offensive line's being developed. Are they being developed in the way that they need to with the investments that have been made? Then you're going to have to add more speed at receiver. You've got to add a lot of speed at running back because you had absolutely none all year, and it helped burn you. And then defensive line. You're going to have to make significant investments on the defensive line to really get to where you need to go. Because the Eagles showed if you've got a solid offensive line and you've got a dominant defensive line, it makes things a lot easier when you're trying to call plays and really kind of frustrate a quarterback.
Yeah. And, I think my final, this is probably not entirely optimistic, but this game to me, Nick, is going to be probably fairly similar in the outcome of the loss to Cincinnati in the AFC Championship game. And certainly there was a lot of similar concepts that Vic Fangio used that the Bengals have used and teams have used against Mahomes to try and limit him. all the other NFL teams are going to be going through this and looking at how the Eagles played this Chiefs offense. They're going to have to find a solution for it because they're going to see exactly what the Eagles did a lot next year, right?
Oh, yeah. And I mean, what the Eagles did has been on tape this year. And it's been on tape from, like you said, part of what Lou Anarumo's done. Been on tape from what some other teams have done. Matt Patricia, when he was with the Lions, and some other teams down the road. Like there's just these little nuances that each team's taken. And Vic Fangio used some stuff that he did whenever he was in Denver. So I mean, like it wasn't out of the norm. It's everything that Vic Fangio used has, I hate to say it, most of it's already been done. He just had a secondary that allowed him the time to execute any and everything that he wanted. And he had a defensive line. He had a combination of secondary and defensive line to fully execute what some other defensive coordinators may have not been able to, outside of probably Lou Anarumo in that AFC Championship game. The Tampa Bay game in the Super Bowl, sadly, with the way that D-line played against the Chiefs. And so, I mean, like I said, there's a handful of games I can think of offhand to where I was like, I remember that from that Lions game probably 3 or 4 years ago. I remember that from, that Tampa Super Bowl. And so at the end of the day, that's what it comes down to is like they've got a full off season for this to unfortunately haunt them and to figure out what needs to be fixed, how to fix it, how to make sure that they stay ahead of NFL teams, because the window and margin has closed significantly because other NFL teams have built up their rosters to be able to compete against them. So the Chiefs the Chiefs, despite a tight salary cap and everything combined, like they're gonna have to do a lot of different things. And the coaching staff has been able to be kind of the equalizer to be able to develop these guys on some cheap contracts to be able to make things happen. And like they're at a point now where some of those guys are getting ready to get paid here in the next year, 2-3 years. And so that next wave is going to have to be developed. And so it'll be an interesting offseason. I'm intrigued to see what ends up happening.
Yeah. Well, we're going to wrap things up here from 2 locations in the Midwest. I'm at the Comfort Suites in New Orleans, Nick. I mean, it's a lively background, as you can tell.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And yeah. I am obviously in Kansas City. I am not where my background shows, but I figured people wanted to see that versus the trophy case this time.
Probably a fair point. Hey, we're not going anywhere during the offseason. If anything, we're just getting busier during the offseason. Next Sunday, we're going to start diving into it. We haven't really plotted out and finalized our schedule yet, Nick, have we, for what we're going to do over the next 5 weeks heading to the draft? And we got the Combine coming up in a couple of weeks.
I mean, look, Super Bowl just ended. We'll get it all figured out. It's not something's going to be figured out today. Right now, you've got to focus on getting back from New Orleans to Kansas City in between the storms, and then we'll go from there.
That's right. We're going to be busy. We got a lot of stuff, a lot of ideas for you. We'll get it all hammered out and let you know the schedule. And, of course, Tuesday night, we'll have the Chiefs Digest live stream. So if you got some things you want to get off your chest, some questions you want to ask, we'll keep it family friendly, but we'll take your questions. We'll talk about it, and then maybe we can all have just a group therapy session on Tuesday night. For me, Matt in New Orleans. Nick, any parting thoughts for you?
Keep on keeping on.
You've been listening to 41 is the Mic, presented by KSHB 41, your home of the Chiefs and Chiefs Digest.